Simon will be back. The subject in society. Unfortunately, the Unabomber can't be on hand to hear this talk on technology, since he may benefit from it. But anyway, Simon will be here next week. Tonight, Dan Dodds. Dan is a graduate of Hillsdale College in Michigan, where he studied accounting. He's a CPA. He's working on his master's degree presently. Also, he's a great Emmanuel Bible Church in Jupiter, and he's also a teacher there. I think I've covered the bases. So without any further ado, I'll have Dan Dodds speak. The subject tonight is which religion is right, does it matter?
I want to say thank you. You guys in the spit zone right there. I got emotional. What I did to try to make this easier tonight is I've made a copy of my notes for everybody to have. So we're going to pass these around because I might get going kind of fast. And so I want to make it a little easier to follow. You guys, did you go for me? Didn't know you were going to be important about this. Oh, preacher? Oh, yeah. In the bathroom. But unlike a politician, I won't commit to one side. Does everybody have them? If there's any extras, leave them on the... Okay, just on the shelf or hold them, that's great. Okay, let's get started. I will commit to keeping this at up to, I will not go over half an hour. I was told I have half an hour here to talk. So I'm going to try to keep it right at that. And so I have to talk fast to do it. The topic tonight is which religion is right, does it matter? What we're going to be talking about first here is this issue about right. Which religion is right? We obviously have to answer the question, is there a right and wrong? So before I get into it, let's just define a couple of terms at least. I'm a Christian, and so you're going to be hearing it from my viewpoint. And I'll be critiquing other viewpoints as I go through this, and you'll see that as I go. Number one is truth, and we're just going to define as that which conforms to fact or reality. I get that out of Webster's. There's no problem there. Christianity, that says the worldview that holds to, at a minimum, the beliefs of the inerrancy of the Bible, a literal interpretation of the Bible, the triune God, three persons in one essence, and the deity of Jesus who was born, died, and raised from the dead for the sins of mankind. Okay, let's get into this. Truth, on 1a, it says, is there truth? And I said, before we can ask what is true, we have to ask, is there a truth? To say that there is no truth is to be self-contradictory. And if you think about that, you say, there is no truth. And then you obviously ask the question, is that a true statement? And either way you go, you end up having to say there is a truth. Now, you can try to be irrational and say, well, I just ignore the whole thing, and that's your choice. But as a Christian, I don't want to do that. And we'll discuss that alternative later, too. What's the nature of truth? Now, this is going to be really important because a lot of times, even when I was here last time at the Wormhole, when I was up here, we got in discussion about, well, there's this religion, that religion, why can't they all be right? And we're going to talk about why that's not possible. So what I said is there's going to have to be some characteristics of truth in order to say that, to make the discussion about truth meaningful. So what I did is I said, I'm just giving three characteristics. I'm not saying this is all encompassing, but there's these three at least. They have to be, number one, universal. Or the truth has to be universal. That means the truth has got to apply to everyone, whether they know it or not, like it or not, believe it or not. What I'm suggesting is that if this is not a characteristic of truth, then there's really no point in even talking about it. Number two, same thing, objective. That means it's publicly accessible. And the opposite of that, it's not subjective. It's not just some feeling-motivated thing. It's something that's objective and publicly accessible. It exists independently of the mind. It's not just something conjured in your brain. Number three, it's invariant. That means it doesn't change from time to time or place to place. It's true for everybody, regardless of where they are. And I'm suggesting again, if it doesn't have all three of these qualities, there's really no point in talking about it anymore. It's saying, well, let's talk about truth. And, well, that's your truth, that's my truth. And we'll see why it doesn't really work. The illustration I've given down at the bottom left in figure 1 is just an attempt to try to help to give some kind of illustration to help understand that. Guys number 1 through 4 exist in a system of truth that is absolute, that's universal, objective, and invariant. That means the truth applies to all of them. Again, whether they like it or not, know it or not, believe it or not. You see how they're all happy with that. That's my little bias coming out there. Numbers 5 through 8 do not live in a world where they say that there is no ultimate truth. Each truth is your own truth. You come up with whatever you want, and that's okay. Okay? Well, let's look at letter C, and I say, what truth is not? Number 1, I have equivocation. That's a mistake that I've seen done several times with this topic of truth. Equivocation is an example I gave there in A is some dogs have spots. My dog has spots. My dog is some dog. You see why that's not appropriate use of the language. We're using some in two different ways there. That doesn't make sense. It's called equivocating. I think people do this when they start talking about truth being relative. And the examples they give is they say, the speed limit on, this is an example, I think it was something very similar here when I was here once. The speed limit on I-95 south of PGA is 55. The speed limit on I-95 north of PGA is 65. And let's assume that it is all the way north. That's not a big deal. It's just an illustration. To say I can relate these two truths to another, therefore truth is relative, is to move from relating two particular truths to a conclusion on the nature of truth. That's wrong. Logically, it's not. You can't do that. You can't say, well, I can relate the speed limit here, and it's different here, so these two truths are different, and I can relate them so that obviously truth, by its nature, is relative. That's using the term wrong. It's equivocating. Okay? We're talking about it's true that the speed limit is 55 south of PGA. It's true that it's 55 north of PGA. They're two different truths. You can relate them to each other. You can compare them to each other, but that doesn't change the nature of truth. Okay. 2, misuses of the word or concept of truth. Truth is relative. You hear that all the time today. And you hear this idea of let's all be tolerant of each other. Let's all agree that everybody's got their own point of view and that's okay. Well, that might, you can say that in philosophy classes and maybe in some places where it doesn't have any ramifications, but when it gets out in the street and plays out, it doesn't work. I said here, this is like saying that green sleeps backwards. Obviously, that is a nonsense statement. The syntax is wrong. It doesn't make sense. So you say, well, what does that mean? Well, that's the same thing as saying that truth is relative. If truth is invariant, objective, and universal, which I believe it is, and I said, again, to say that it's anything else is to say, why even talk about it? If it's those things, then to say that it's relative is to contradict yourself. Truth is universal, then it's not relative. Okay? B, another one you hear people say is, that's true for you. Well, again, if these characteristics of truth are true, that if the truth is universal, objective, and invariant, then to say that's true for you is to make a nonsense statement again, right? It says, what I suggest there is, I said, let's not use this word this way for it confuses things. What it's really saying is, I prefer this, you prefer that. Instead of saying that's true for you and that's true for you, that's irrational to say that if it's a contradictory statement. Say, that's what you like, this is what I like, let's just go with that. Okay? It's going to make communication a lot easier if we're trying to accomplish something here. And when we talk about truth, let's try to get our terms right. Now, number 3, I said here, there are rationality and consequences of a relativistic philosophy. For people who say that truth is relative, there are consequences to that. Number 1, as I said, there is no truth. Obviously, you're saying to say it's relative is to say there is no ultimate truth. And so you really don't have truth anymore. It's just a preference. Number 2, there is no knowledge. If there is no truth, then you can't really know anything. If there's no ultimate standard to look to, if there's no ultimate truth, then you can't really know anything because it might change anytime. It might be different in one society to another. So again, what's the purpose of talking about it? Number 3, there's no meaning. And by meaning here, I'm suggesting that it means meaning refers to meaning beyond our own experience or something which transcends us. There's a lot of different meanings to the word meaning. And all I'm saying by that is that there's no meaning, that there's really no significance in anything anymore because you can't, there's no truth, there's nothing that you can know, and so boy, what's the point of all? And you see this played out when people say, well, I don't try to tell my children what is true. I just let them decide for themselves. Well, what you're telling your children then is you say, well, he's got to determine his own truth. What you're telling your child is there is no truth, and there's nothing you can really know, and therefore there's really no meaning in life. So you go out there in that big world, you try to figure out what it is, because I don't have anything to share with you. If there's no universal truth, then you've got nothing to share with your kids. Okay, these are practical these are practical consequences. I'm not saying this proves anything. I'm just saying these are consequences to it. Now here's a real important point. Number 2, as I said, morals and logic. The characteristics of truth must also be descriptive of the laws of morals and laws of logic if either is to be discussed meaningfully. They would have to be universal, objective, and invariant. So let's look at that picture again in Figure 1. Let's take the laws of morality. Numbers 1 through 4. Let's say that there is such a thing as an ultimate objective standard of morality. What that means for numbers 1 through 4 is that they all have one objective standard they can look to and hold each other accountable to. And say, what you did was wrong. Given our standard up here, what you did was wrong. Okay? Which is very good for society because we can get along better that way. There's practical benefits to that. Again, that doesn't prove it. I'm just saying there are practical benefits. The laws of logic, and this is really interesting. You get this with a lot of atheists. Many atheists will say, the laws of logic are just man-made. They call that conventional. They're not universal, and they can change at any moment. So that kind of universe, I'm sorry, let me go back here a second. Let me jump back to the morals, because I want to get to the 5 through 8 on that. The 5 through 8 who believe that morals are relative to each person, you start to see the consequences of that. If number 5 says, it's okay for me to kill anybody I want, I'm being drastic here, and I understand that. That helps illustrate it. But if number 5 says, my moral system is I can kill anybody who gets in my way. And number 6 says, he has his own moral code. So number 5 says, number 6, you're in my way, and I'm going to kill you. In a relativistic society, there's no reason to say that number 5 is wrong, because in his worldview, in his moral system, it's okay. So he's being consistent with his moral system. He's being moral with that system. Okay, now you can start seeing what kind of chaos that's going to lead to in society if you start saying, well, you just pick your own thing and do whatever you want to do. So relativistic morals just doesn't work. It's not rationally justifiable. Also, the laws of logic, going back to that, as I was saying to you, many atheists believe that the laws of logic are conventional, that they're man-made. So they just make up their own system of logic. And so if you have that, you end up with numbers 5 through 8. Number 5 says, okay, this is my system of logic. Number 6 says, this is my system of logic. And now we're going to say, okay, how are we going to ever decide anything? If there is no there's no universality to the laws of logic, if logic doesn't apply to everybody across the board the same way, then what's the purpose of even debating? I mean, we have debates where some people say, well, I think laws of logic can be changed anytime you want. And I'll say, well, okay, I'll change mine right now, and I win the debate. Because I just changed the laws to fit my viewpoint, and there we go. I debated informally one guy who's an atheist. It was just amazing. I said, so the laws of logic can change any time? He said, no, not during the debate. At the beginning and at the end they can change, but during the debate they're all the same. That's a relativistic philosophy, and that's what it leads to. It's really absurd. Okay, let's go to page 2 here. Oh, let me point out one thing before we go there. On figure 1, I want to point out something very, very important. Again, in our society, we're seeing a lot of people say, I believe in 5 through 8. I believe in a relativistic philosophy. I believe that the laws of logic can be whatever you want them to be. I believe that the morals can be whatever you want it to be. You pick your own. So it's very interesting that they don't live that way. As soon as a guy can say, I'm a relativist, I believe in relativistic philosophy, you can do whatever thing you want. That's your moral system. But as soon as you cut in front of him in line, you can say, hey, stop that. You can't do that. That's wrong. Why? He's appealing to some universal standard. He can say you're violating if you say my moral system, if he wants to try to stick with his relative, my moral system says you can't do that. Yeah, but my moral system says you can. So I'm just being consistent. I'm being moral. You can't condemn me as being immoral because I don't have your system. So people say, and same thing with logic. If people say, oh, you're being illogical, and I'm saying, well, if your system of logic is one that you can change whenever you want, then I'm going to come up with anyone I want, and we're never going to be able to come to agreement. So laws of logic have to be universal to make it to be meaningful. Otherwise, you just end up in these kind of silliness. But again, what you'll find is you'll get somebody who believes in the laws of logic that are relative, and they'll be up here debating as if somehow the laws of logic are now fixed for this momentary time during the debate, but they can change any time they want after that. And that's not rational. Okay, so they keep acting like they're these universal laws, when in fact they keep saying that they're not. Okay, number 3. Behavior is belief. If someone claims a certain belief but continues to act in such a way as to contradict what he is saying, we call him a hypocrite. We hear this about Christians a lot. We say he doesn't really believe what he says because he doesn't live it out. This is true of people who claim that truth is relative. I'm saying it goes both ways. There are Christian hypocrites. There are atheistic hypocrites as well. They don't act consistently with that belief, and so we're justified in concluding that they don't really believe it. The way you live out your life indicates what you really believe. You can talk all you want, but if you continue to act a certain way that contradicts what you say, I'm going to say that's what you really believe, the way you're behaving. Let's look at how that plays out in just a day-to-day situation. Whenever you do something like go to a grocery store to buy milk, you reveal many things about yourself. When you first walk up to the grocery store, you assume that you and the store are two different things, not one, thus showing your rejection of most Eastern and New Age religions. When you walk down the same dairy aisle and select the same kind of milk, you assume that the world is not chaotic, but orderly, regular, and divided into set kinds of things. When you stand in line with others expecting to respect your space in person, you reveal your rejection of moral relativism and your deep trust in absolute ethical norms. When you calculate your available change, compare the price of milk, and make the exchange with the clerk at the register, you engage in a complex array of thought processes involving non-material rules of reasoning, thus showing your rejection of materialism and evolution. In short, when you do something as mundane as buying milk, you accept and reject all sorts of views. You act like you reject many popular and religious and scientific claims, many popular ones. In fact, given the sum of what you assume and reject just when buying milk, you act like you believe that you live in a world described by Christianity. The world depicted above suggests complexities and contours of reality that are only supplied in Christianity. So what is the Bible saying is happening here? Okay. Let's look at number 4. What's the Bible saying describing what's happening? What the Bible says, well, let me read the verse here. Romans 1, 18-21. The wrath of God is being revealed against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. What the Bible is describing here is it's saying that there is, in letter A here, see, people are suppressing the truth to live the way they want. So what happens is they take the truth that God has made very clear to them, and they've suppressed it and deluded themselves into thinking this doesn't exist, this is not true. And when they do that, when you suppress the truth like that, you create a vacuum. And now you're going to have to come up with some other philosophy to try to explain your life. You have to try to explain morals. You have to try to explain reality. You have to try to explain knowledge. You have to try to explain science and logic. And so you have to construct something to try to make sense of these things. Okay? The Bible says that's what people who are not Christians, who are not believers, they've suppressed the truth, and now they're trying to construct some system to make sense of their experience here on earth. The second thing is it says people are attempting to, the one that they're suppressing, they're attempting to construct it. Letter C, no man will be, this is a Christian worldview, okay? No man will be able to construct a worldview apart from Christianity which will not result in irrationality. Proverbs 1:7 in the Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning or the foundation of knowledge. It says unless you have a Christian worldview, that's a Christian view of metaphysics, of epistemology, logic, science, morality, and anything else you want, you're not going to be able to make intelligible your experience. That somehow in your worldview, it's going to be either inconsistent, or it's going to be inconsistent, or it's going to be arbitrary. Those are two cardinal sins in philosophy. You can't be arbitrary and you can't be inconsistent. So if you violate one of those, it's irrational. Christianity is the only one that doesn't do that. In the questions, you can ask me that again, okay? The verse is, do you have one of the sheets? Inconsistent, yeah, to be inconsistent or arbitrary is one of the sins, or the two sins of philosophy. We can talk about that if you want. Number 5, worldviews defined. This is really important. One thing that I see is, again, now this is not a Christian talking to you. I'm going to talk to you just in terms of philosophy. It's very interesting in the last century how philosophy has really come to understand how people think in terms of worldviews. We don't think in terms of just a single belief. We think in terms of a collection or a web of beliefs. These beliefs are all interrelated. They're dependent upon each other. And they have certain assumptions, what we call presuppositions, which are typically not justified, or at least they don't try to. If you look at that figure 2 on the front page, this is just an illustration. This is not a hard and fast way it has to be, but I'm just trying to help to picture this a little bit. I'm saying this is an example, an illustration of a worldview. A worldview, there are tiers of beliefs, and you all got to experience this every day. There's certain beliefs that you'll give up like that, and other ones you're going to hold on to no matter what. Those are what we're going to call our presuppositions, or things that I don't care what evidence you show me, I'm going to continue to believe it. Everybody has that. I don't care if you're atheist, if you're Hindu, if you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, pick it. All of them have certain presuppositions about reality and about knowledge and things like that. So you see that there's a tier system here. The second thing is, you notice it looks kind of like little jigsaw puzzle pieces. The reason I put that in there is just to show that these things are interrelated. You can say, for example, let me give you an example of why you have a problem here. For example, I say they're interrelated in that if you have somebody who says, I'm a materialist, all I believe that exists is matter. Like, this is all that's real, okay? There's nothing out there, there's no spiritual entities or anything like that. It has to be material for me to believe it. Now, can a person like that justify believing in laws of logic? Laws of logic are not material. So I'd say, well, if that's what you say is real, you can't see, taste, touch, smell, hear the laws of logic, so you can't have laws of logic in your system. Okay, so he's going to have to modify his system to somehow say, okay, well, no, I don't believe in those things. Now he's going to try to modify it to make it fit, and that's what everybody does. They try to make all these pieces fit. Okay, let's go back to this other thing. I just, again, suggest that all worldviews have assumptions or presuppositions relating to one or more of the following: morality, logic, reality, and knowledge. Reality is what they call metaphysics, and I know I don't like to use the long words, but for those of you who like that stuff, there it is. Knowledge, epistemology. Okay, and D I have here, differing metaphysical and epistemological assumptions have been at the heart of the philosophical debate since the beginning of time. This is interesting because this is not just a Christian saying this, okay? You take somebody like Cornelius Van Til or Dr. Greg Bonson who say this as Christians, but then you have people like Wittgenstein, people like W.T. Jones, people like Lord Van Orn and Quine in Harvard, and they're all realizing, Thomas Kuhn is another one, none of these are Christians, and they're saying, you know what? Everybody has worldviews. It's not just like one Christian saying, well, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and somebody else says, well, I don't think he rose from the dead. There's a whole worldview that's brought in here. You have somebody might say, well, I believe that A equals A. That's the beginning of my, I don't believe anything else except A equals A. Well, actually, you can't even say that without making all kinds of other assumptions, which we can get into in the cross-examination, if you like. But I'm just showing you that everybody has a worldview. So it comes down here and says the problem is that one's view of logic, and most people want to say, well, let's use logic to try to figure this out. The problem is that your view of logic and what you think logic is going to be determined by what you think is real and what you believe about knowledge. A monist view of logic is different from that of an atomist. So consequently, you can't appeal to logic as an arbitrator, as logic is the very issue of question. One guy who's a monist says, logic is this. A Hindu says logic is this. A Westerner might say, well, logic is this. Well, you can't say, okay, you guys logically figure it out. Well, they don't even agree on what logic is because they don't agree on what reality is. So we got a major problem. And you sit there and fight it out all you want, but their fundamental presuppositions are different, and they're never going to come to an agreement. The ultimate question then is, which worldview provides the preconditions of intelligibility? And by that I mean, which worldview gives the necessary framework and foundation upon which we can make sense of logic and morals and anything else without at the same time violating it? Okay, here's my conclusion. I think I'm doing well. Okay. The transcendental argument for the existence of God. This is probably one that y'all haven't heard much of because it hasn't been real well written about yet. So here we go. Every worldview from Hinduism to existentialism, from nihilism to Mormonism, with the exception of Christianity, ultimately resorts to arbitrariness or contradictions, and as such disqualify themselves as rational options. Now, I'm not saying that that proves Christianity, but I'm saying that all others will. That's the Christian worldview. You cannot build a defensible worldview other than Christianity. The truth of Christianity is proved from the impossibility of the contrary. Without it, one could prove nothing. Christianity is the only worldview which can make sense of our experience, logic, morality, or any other fact of the universe, including free will, the dignity of man, or the planet Pluto. As such, even if one wanted to use logic to disprove Christianity, he would have to assume the Christian worldview first, so that he would have an intelligible context in which, and a justifiable foundation upon which, he could use logic to justify his criticism. So he actually has to use the Christian worldview and say, okay, there's only one worldview that can justify the use of logic. I'm not saying other people don't use logic, they do, but they can't justify it. Well, if I want to justify it, I've got to go to Christianity. So if I want to try to argue against Christianity, I'm actually going to have to borrow it in order to try to argue against it. So you're affirming it in the very process of trying to deny it. Okay. If he, there we go. As such, even if one wanted to use logic to disprove Christianity, you would have to assume the Christian worldview first, so he would have an intelligible context to which, I already said this, and last sentence, 2 sentences. If he is unable to justify logic within his worldview, this is a non-Christian, then he cannot justifiably employ its use. Now again, a lot of non-Christians use logic. Well, I'm saying you can't make sense of it in a non-Christian worldview. This makes Christianity the necessary precondition or foundation of intelligibility. Without it, we cannot make sense of anything. So to answer the question, which religion is right, I think you know pretty much what I'm saying. If that's not clear now, then just read the sheet. Does it matter? Well, of course, I think it matters tremendously. If Christianity is true, that has very serious consequences for all of us. And I don't come up here because I'm trying to impress you guys with philosophy or because I think I'm, Mr. Brilliant or something like that, but I do care about you. As a Christian, I'm very concerned. I believe there's a rational and objective argument for the existence of God. I don't have any problem with that. The problem is when people don't believe that, and there is a consequence for that. The Bible talks about if you don't believe in Jesus as your Savior, that you're destined for hell. And that concerns me very much for all of you. That's why I'm here tonight. Just in closing then, there's no way you can take 3,000 years or more of philosophy and in half an hour lay it out here so everybody says, wow, I'm convinced. I'm going to go home and be a Christian. And so maybe there's a lot of you saying, man, that guy's nuts. He's crazy. And I just want you to know I'd be more than happy to meet with anybody anytime. Just come by and see me. I got some cards. And we'll sit down over coffee and we'll just talk it through. And if I don't convince you, that's okay. And you can try to convince me if you like too. All right? So that's my presentation. I guess we'll open it for questions now. Okay, Ralph?
Based on the concept of separation of church and state, if I may use that particular term, on that basis alone, the word morality, the word sin, the word salvation, I'm giving my opinion now and then I get this question. I don't consider myself an atheist. At the same time, I consider atheism in the same ballpark as someone who can particularly comment that any one religion, or any religion, is in any way connected to the concept of God. So I take the position that religion of any type and God have nothing to do with one another, and that atheism is just as inappropriate because there is no way of proving or even demonstrating without proving that there is no God. If there's a separation of church and state, you make reference to Webster. I don't see why the word morality, sin, salvation, here doesn't have salvation. And you use the word truth before in terms of being universal or being absolute. And you said it has to apply to all of us. I would disagree respectfully because if your truth and your God is an absolute, or I'm going to say your religion because I'm not separating your religion and the natural law of the universe, however large it might be or however small it might be, that it doesn't apply to all of us. It applies to everything, including maggots and viruses and bacteria, etc. So if your truth is that absolute, is that universal, why do you limit it only as applied to all of us? And the other question is, if Webster's dictionary was really followed the separation of church and state, so I'd say close to 30% of the words in the dictionary don't even exist. And they don't exist because the planet Jupiter has no salvation. The planet Mars cannot commit a sin. Your dog cannot. In other words, all these words have no meaning. And they are invented by man to just, in my opinion, it's like belonging to a club. I'll finish in 10 more seconds. If I am impotent, I join the club of impotent people. If I am fat, people have a tendency to join the club of fat people. If I want to believe the world is flat, I join the Flat World Society. So I think a lot of what you're saying, while intellectually it's nice to listen to, I most respectfully submit, has played a role just as much, in my opinion, I say this most respectfully, as narcotics and alcoholism, etc., in deluding people into believing what reality really is. And my final remark, and I thank you for listening to me, is that even when Kevin was up there, and Simon was up there, those who proclaim their atheism, and I've spoken to several people who are in the audience tonight, you also use the word here, metaphysical and epistemological. And yet I could show you, because with your concurrence, I will take a card. And I've asked atheists and other people, metaphysics has two sub-areas. One is epistemology and the other is ontology. Ontology has to do with the real world, as it really is, and epistemology is how we perceive it through our senses, but more than our senses. And that's why I think you're playing a little game. It has to do with perception, with intuition, and things of that sort, and thinking, which is not part of our five senses. So would you go home, be kind enough, and I say this most respectfully, and look up the word metaphysical, and perhaps the next time you're here sitting there and talking, indicate that you use the word incorrectly, because metaphysical is not the real word, ontological is the word, and ontological and epistemology make up the metaphysical concept that we think of. And the final thing is, logic is a trivial irrelevancy. You kept using that word all wrong. As a scientist, I can tell you, logic is just a word that connects conceptual thought that many people use as a joke, as they did with Sherlock Holmes and so on and so forth. It is nonsense. So therefore,
okay, let me address. I've got about 5 or 6
but that church and state is being addressed.
Okay,
Remember what these words mean. And
okay, well, I'm not sure how you connect church and state with sin, but let me just go through a few things. Number one, you
the
said,
question is, why would we be forced to use the word salvation?
well, I'm not forcing you. I'm not forcing anybody. Let me go through a few things here. You said here, if it's universal, it applies to maggots. That's not the biblical worldview. It's talking about people and people making moral choices. Animals are not at the same level metaphysically or in the biblical worldview. We'll talk about metaphysics in a second. So it doesn't apply to animals. It's not an issue for the Christian. If you want to put people at the same level as animals, you can. That's not the Christian worldview, and I wouldn't argue that. Huh? God puts them above animals. No, man is more important than animals. Yeah. Number 2, I'm giving you the biblical worldview. Okay, number 2, separation of church and state. We can get into that. I personally don't believe in that, but that's within the context of my worldview, and it's not critical as far as whether I say I believe in the existence of God or not. That's not my argument. We can get into that. If you take my card, we'll get together and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. 3 about Webster, invented by man, and you said 40% of the words don't. 30%. Okay, I'll put 30% here. When you start talking about philosophy, you're obviously going to get into a lot of questions and issues about language, and questions about, is language meaningful? Does language communicate? Or do the meanings of words have any real meaning? Or is it just what you want it to mean? If you start saying that Webster's, the words in Webster's are not useful, and not, you said they're wrong. Okay, now, well, what you've done is you're making a certain statement saying they don't belong there. Obviously, you're appealing to some standard and saying, by my standard, they don't belong there, but you have to justify that standard. Now, I don't have any problem as a Christian using Webster. Some places I don't agree with Webster, some I do, and we can sit down and talk about that. But in the context of the Christian worldview, language is meaningful, and we can get somewhere if we believe that. Some of the current atheists are getting to the point of saying, I don't even believe language has any meaning. It's just whatever feeling you get out of it, that's what it is for you. And so that renders language meaningless. There's no point in talking about it anymore. If you want to redefine terms or use different words, we can, but to just automatically preclude them and exclude them because they're religious in nature, I think is bias, is prejudice. And you're going to have to justify that prejudice instead of saying, well, I don't like the religious terms, so I'm going to get rid of them. It's got to be justified. You can't just arbitrarily say, I'm going to get rid of these because they don't apply. Next one, the metaphysics as far as the ontology and epistemology. You saw in my little sheet there, I've got epistemology next to metaphysics. The metaphysics is the study of what the nature, origin, and structure of reality. Okay? That, again, you can go to philosophy books and read that. Okay? Epistemology is a separate study. It's not typically considered a subsection of metaphysics, but it is considered related to very much. That's why in that worldview picture that I drew, I had them side by side. Because what you think is real is going to affect what evidence you'll accept as knowledge, or what evidence you'll accept to know something. If you say that all that's real is what you can see and feel and taste and touch, etc., then your epistemology, in terms of your theory of knowledge, you say, in order for me to know something, I'm going to have to sense it. That's going to be a compatible epistemology. Okay, so I'm just saying, in terms of, you're using these terms of saying there's subsections and things, that's not critical to me to say that epistemology is a subset of metaphysics or that it's related to. If we define the term the same way, we can still talk about it intelligently. Well, and ontology is a word, as I recall, that's also, I've heard it as a subset of metaphysics. I don't think it's a word that's used as much anymore as metaphysics is. And again, we can probably have a fruitful discussion, sit down and talk about it. But once we get the terms right, it's going to make it easier to discuss. And as far as logic being a trivial irrelevancy, I find it interesting that you're sitting here arguing with me. Not mean, I think you have a great attitude, and I appreciate that. But we're sitting here in a logical, supposedly, discourse, and yet you're saying at the same time logic is trivial. If logic is trivial, then what's the point of even having a discussion?
But we're not having a logical discussion. I'm having a thinking, conceptual discussion. And I was still hoping, because I want to start that away too much, that later on, you may have been kind enough to address that while it would be right for the president to come up something of this question is logical or not, but you can bought it. You're right, I'm not buying it anyway. Everyone has a right to practice their religion, but whatever that might be. But I have trouble when people start applying their religion, because on Sundays I think certain things, and on Saturday nights or Friday nights I think other things.
Well, here, let me say something. Let's run with it just for a second. In terms of the practical application, I think this is very interesting. A lot of people say, well, if you use the Bible and try to apply it to society, it's very restrictive. There's these 10 Commandments. There's all these other things. Man, you guys, you Christians, are like trying to tie my lifestyle down, man. I don't like that. What I find is fascinating is when people get away from a Christian worldview in terms of ethics and in terms of legislation, you actually end up with a society that becomes much more tyrannical. A good example, the Bible has 18, as I count them, different capital offenses. Communist China, I just read this 2 or 3 days ago, Communist China has 68. The United States, capital offenses. But it doesn't, I'm not, well, see, I don't use religion, I don't use that term, I use worldview. Everybody's got a worldview. No, that's what I'm saying, is that they, okay, well, they're atheistic in their thinking. Okay, or you can say Confucius if you want, whatever. What I'm saying is that the idea that if we impose a Christian worldview or laws, is going to make society like all of a sudden now anybody can't do anything they want. Now let's say what happens, you just say, okay, let's open up society and start letting people do what they want. Yeah, great. And they go for it, and pretty soon society's out of control, and you say, we got to stop this. These people are going crazy. So you end up with more laws than you'd have the other way. Oh, I have no problem with laws. I'm just saying that you say, I don't have a right to rob a bank. I have a choice. That doesn't make it a right. Okay, again. So are you saying that morality is totally dependent upon what we decide as a society? Well, you use the word right. We have a right. Where do rights come from? Yeah. Yeah, but where do they come from? Inherent from what? Well, have you ever seen natural law? By definition. Well, let me explain something here, because I know this is the kind of thing that start getting everybody hyped up. In order to be fair to people, no, I don't mind that, but in order to be fair to people, let's raise our hands, and I'll start picking. You have your hand up next. Why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
what does all this prove? Christianity. The question is, which religion is right? Does it matter? First of all, you took atheists. Atheists is not a religion. They don't give a damn whether God exists or not.
Well, it depends how you define religion. I don't use the term religion, I use the term worldview.
The second one, that's the title says, which religion is right. So, how does all this prove Christianity is right? Nothing. First thing is logic. Why do you need a logic to prove? Do you mean to say you can prove that Christ resurrected by logic? There was no even eye evidence. There's no evidence for resurrection.
I don't use evidence in my apologetics.
Well, when you use logic
I use logic.
and philosophy, and another thing is all this philosophical discussion. Why do you need all this philosophy? Is just the underlying foundation on which religion is built. You can intellectualize your whole thing through the Bible. You will end up offset after the fourth page. Because your logic and intellect doesn't hold water then.
I don't follow your argument.
No, you can't use your logic to go through the Bible.
My logic to go through the Bible.
Yeah, because you have to very first accept that the Bible is the truth. That itself is illogical. It
Yeah, I
depends
believe
on
the
your
Bible
opinion.
is preconditioned to make
Yeah.
sense of logic. But that doesn't mean the Bible
The same thing goes for me. When you say that every worldwide view, Hinduism exists in exception of Christianity, arbitrary, that's absurd. Hinduism has a logic. Hinduism has its own foundation concept. How do you know which concept is right?
Well, we talked about Hindu logic. Hindu logic.
I don't need a logic for this thing. It is a religion. That's not. Why do you need
The
a
question
logic?
is each one equally legitimate?
Of course, it's a religion.
Okay, well, see, now to me, that's irrational.
Because you take Bible, that's the foundation.
That's right. Because to take any other view is to be irrational, which is what you're demonstrating. You're saying you say I can have two views that contradict each other and they're both right.
Yeah, but
That's irrational. And as a Christian, I say to take any view other than the biblical one is to be irrational. So you're doing what I'm
so I
saying.
think I can tell you that any of the views on Bhagavad Gita is irrational to 50%.
Yeah, but then you'd have to justify that.
I don't have to justify anything because
Well, if you want to be philosophically, if you want to have philosophical integrity, you do.
You have to prove Bible is the word of God. That's the absolute foundation.
You have to prove it.
Bible, yes.
Okay?
Beyond reasonable doubt.
Well, okay. See, there again, you're begging the question.
I'm not questioning. You have this whole thing doesn't prove.
Well, I'm not suggesting it will to you.
Logic and philosophy and
Okay?
thought about
Let me tell you that the Christian worldview is to say, you said it doesn't prove it to me. Obviously it's saying, okay, well, what's it going to take to prove it to you? So what I'm saying is, you're going to have to come up with a rule and say, okay, this is what it will take. Let me finish the thought. It's going to prove it to me that the Bible is true. I say, okay, now you set up the rule. But the first thing I'm going to ask you is, before I say, okay, critique the Bible now, I'm going to say, how do you justify those rules? Where do they come from?
No, that's the thing. You can go down in the layer. You will end up in somewhere. The same thing can be applied to Hinduism too. You can ask me how those rules are set up. You can end up the
The
same
difference is I believe I can justify it
How?
from the impossibility of the contrary.
Go ahead.
That's
Prove
it.
me. Show me the
The
resurrection.
Christian worldview is the only one that can make sense of the laws of logic, laws of morality, laws of science.
I don't want. You need to say that.
You don't want
You are a
logic.
Christian because you are logically thinking that you are that's what you. That's how you became a Christian.
That's what, no.
How
I
are
became
you-
a Christian
how did you
because
become
I
a
was
Christian?
saved.
How did you become a Christian? Have you born in a Christian family background?
I didn't hear that last part.
Were you born in?
Are you born?
I was not born in a Christian family, no.
Are you mixed with more Christians because there are more Christians around than the other number of people here?
Yeah.
So obviously you have.
Well, there's no question I had a lot of influence. No question I had a lot of influence, sure.
So,
But that doesn't mean I- How do I know? Well, because of my biblical view of Christianity, because that's not how you come to know. But the thing is, I have continued to question my Christianity from day one. You can throw up your hands and say, oh, that doesn't count that. Right. It still comes down to rational debate. You can throw out reason if you want. But as a person, as a Christian, or as a person, I don't want to throw it out.
Yeah, I have said.
There's another question.
Okay. Well, take my card. We'll get together for lunch. We'll talk about arbitrariness.
I have
Okay.
a lot of reasons.
Okay. Yes.
If you steal, who do you think you're stealing from? Yourself? Somebody else?
Like, give me an example. If I
Okay,
steal
I think
from the
if
Wormhole,
I steal from you, I'm stealing a lot more from myself than I got from you. The only difference is I don't know what I stole out of my own juice. I think everyone that says Ten Commandments is reversible.
reversible meaning that.
Irreversible, you're taking from yourself when you disobey them.
Oh yeah, I mean.
Okay, the other thing is we were talking about laws of faith. what laws have been written that lasted longer than not as long, but what laws have lasted like the Ten Commandments? Okay. No, all I'm saying is Thomas Jefferson wrote the laws of our land, and they're the only laws of any land that's lasted 200 years without being disrupted, completely changed.
Okay. Todd, are you agreeing with me then? Or?
No, I agree with you. I'm just
There's no argument.
because they say separation of states. The reason the separation of state happened in our country because where the people, the founders of our country, came to this country, religion dominated everything and crucified the people if they didn't follow every law of the letter. The people wanted freedom to establish their own religion, and there was a lot of different kinds that came to this country.
Okay. That's what that. No. You have your hand.
Okay. First of all, I missed a little bit of your discussion, so I want to make sure I understand things straight.
Okay.
First, you assume that the Bible is true. Or you use the Bible, you prove the Bible is true using logic. Right?
You prove the logical process, yeah.
Okay, use a logical process to prove the Bible is the only right view, because it's the only one that can make sense of the way life is. Logic.
That's right.
And okay, so you study the Muslim Bible and the Hindu Bible and the Buddhist beliefs, all the other beliefs, and you know that they all contradict somewhere.
I believe I do, yeah. To the extent that I've studied them, I've seen it every time.
But you see no contradictions in the Bible at all.
No.
Okay. Making sure here. Okay, that's all I wanted.
Okay, maybe I can.
I often wondered on the first page, when it says Abraham begot somebody, who begot Abraham,
Who is Abraham?
or the first one.
Yeah, it's Sarah. That's right.
That's what I mean,
By saying that in saying that they're assuming the law of non-contradiction or the law of contradiction. They cannot both be a non-belief and the same proposition cannot be affirmed or denied. So those who deny the laws of logic assume them and use them in the process of discussion. Otherwise, when you say certain things, you mean things, you do not mean other things. So we might as well be saying la 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 ta-di-da as to say I don't believe in the laws of logic. So anyone who thinks he's communicating and using terms in a certain way to make an affirmation or a proposition is presupposing the law of non-contradiction. But I thought you should have used that. I thought that'd be a very good rebuttal. He's using logic right now. And he's assuming he's a certain proposition. And he does not mean, he's not saying the dog is outside right now or the dog is in the house. He's assuming some other thing, that when he uses certain words, he does not mean other terms.
I got you. Let me just make one comment in regards to the contradictions. Something that maybe be helpful to some people. A lot of people think the Bible is full of contradictions, and obviously some of them, the things you have to sit down and study. But one of the things that helped me is if you think of contradictions this way. If I said to you, Sam is Joe's son, Sam is not Joe's son. If I just said that, you would say, well, that's a contradiction, right? So, on the surface, it is. But what if I said Sam was adopted? Well, it's not a contradiction anymore, right? I've added another piece of information here that's now making sense of it, because legally he's a son, but physically he's not. If I said two twin babies were born, the first one was born at 1:20 a.m. The second one was born at 1:10 a.m. Is that a contradiction? Same day. You say, well, that's impossible. It's an impossibility. It's ridiculous. Nobody believes that. Well, what if I said, well, it's daylight savings time. At 2 o'clock, it went back an hour, so the next one was born at 1:10. Adding a little bit more information now clarifies it. I think the same situation is in the Bible. You have things where, oh, this is a contradiction, and you immediately excuse it instead of taking the time and say, okay, let's look and see where that contradiction might be resolved by some additional information. What's that? You have to raise your hand. He has his hand up first.
Both of those can't be true if you define the sun the same way.
Right, yeah.
So,
But that's what I'm saying. If you just put that on the surface.
Yeah, but in the Bible, where the contradictions occurred, aren't defined well enough, but when you get to the point where there's so much room for interpretation, you may as well just throw the whole thing out because you can't know what they meant anyway. Because what the heck
Well, it
is
depends on
my
what you
son in that
think.
case?
Depends what you think about interpretation.
Well,
If you say there's so much room for interpretation, we have to get and talk about what you think language.
if the Bible's the Word of God, why wouldn't God be intelligent enough to not contradict himself in saying Sam's Joe's son and Sam's not Joe's son?
He doesn't contradict himself.
Well, it
You're assuming that God, you say God's not intelligent
no,
enough.
for
The question
example,
is, why aren't we intelligent enough to figure that out?
no, that's not the question. Because the fact is, it was written by a man, it wasn't written by God.
It was written by God through
What about for a specific example, something that was brought up in the recent Newsweek and Time articles about the resurrection, when Jesus appeared after he was resurrected, and appeared to different people. In different gospels, it says he appeared, to Mary Magdalene in one, and he appeared to, I think it was Paul in another one. So how's that not a contradiction? They appeared to both. How's that not a contradiction?
Why can't he appear to both? I don't follow the logic there.
Because in one account he appeared to two women,
Okay, so he
in
appeared
the
to two women in one
he appeared
account.
someplace different to Paul.
Okay, what's the problem with that?
Immediately, the first people that saw him, because I'm sorry, I'm not giving enough.
Oh, first people saw him.
Yes, the first people that saw him after he was resurrected. In one instance it was Mary Magdalene, or another woman, in another instance it was, I believe it was Paul. How is that not a contradiction?
Yeah, it wasn't Paul, but I'd have to,
Michael, if you take the four gospel accounts of the post-resurrection appearances of Christ, they integrate together quite beautifully. They're really, what appears to be contradiction is not a contradiction. It just dovetails together like that. Different people.
well, I hear what you're saying. I think it's a legitimate question. I haven't heard that one. It's a new one. Every time I come here, I hear a new one.
There's a lot more. I mean, I've been going through the Bible line by line.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do, though. I'll tell you what I'd be happy to do. I'll give you my card. We'll sit down, and the question is, if I can deal with every one of your contradictions, do you become a Christian?
No.
So what that shows is you have a predisposition to not
No,
believe
because
it.
the reason that I don't believe the Bible is not because it contains some contradictions.
Okay?
Even if it has
So
no
contradictions are
contradictions,
not a problem.
even if it had no contradictions, there would still be no reason to believe that. It would just mean that it was better constructed in having no contradictions, but it wouldn't be a reason to believe that.
Well, again, it depends on how you qualify. There wouldn't be a reason to believe. I would suggest there's every reason to believe.
Well, if I wrote a work of fiction and I had no contradictions within my piece of fiction, that doesn't make my piece of fiction true.
That's not what I'm saying about the Bible. It's saying the
No,
Bible is
that's
the
the
Word
way
of
I
God
look at the
because there's
Bible.
no
It's a piece of
contradiction.
fiction. And
Okay, well, you have
it
to
has a piece of
decide.
fiction, whether it has contradictions or not doesn't make it
That's an
true.
assumption that you made, but you haven't proven that.
There's no
It
reason to
goes
believe
beyond,
otherwise.
when I don't know if you've heard the whole talk or not, but you can't just take one belief. There's a lot of other things that are happening here. Like you say, I don't just take one proposition. I believe the Bible's fiction. Okay? Well, when you're going to critique the Bible, you're going to have to use a lot of things to do this critique. You have to use logic. You have to look at history and language and interpretation and your theory of knowledge and what you think is real. We have to use all those things. I'm going to start questioning all those. If you say, I don't know what's real, I don't know, have a theory of knowledge, I can't make sense of logic, but your Bible sure doesn't make sense. I'm going to say, you have to justify your position and come after me.
It sounds like you're saying that the Bible must be true and look like it's true disprove it.
No, I can see why you say that, but that's not what I'm saying. You're exactly right. It can sound that way. I'm not saying the Bible is true because everything else is false. I'm saying that the Bible is the only worldview that can give you a metaphysical, an epistemological, a logical, a moral, a scientific, and you pick any other fact of the universe you want. Well, let's take for example, uniformity of nature. Do you believe in nature's uniform?
Define that better. I don't
Do you believe that if I drop an apple 5 times and it falls, and I drop it 6 times, is it going to fall?
5 times would probably be enough time to really do an experiment.
Okay, 100 times, 1,000 times.
Do it enough times, you could predict it and do it again. It doesn't mean that's necessarily going to happen, but that would be your prediction.
Okay, so see, in my worldview, I can make sense and say, yeah, it will fall again. In an atheistic universe, I'd say you don't have the ability to say that it will be uniform.
Why is it? I mean, why is it?
Okay.
Science, that has nothing to do with religion.
Oh, science and religion have everything to do with each other. Because your metaphysical, science is very much theory bound, very much theory, very much. Well, in this particular case, in this example, I'm just talking about the uniformity of nature.
No, you just say that the science and religion are
Yeah, because all science requires interpretation. And interpretation can be a metaphysical and epistemological issue. That's a worldview. No, I know. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a worldview, to understand how a worldview works, and this is what I'm saying, this is not just a Christian saying this. The way worldviews work is it has a combination of things. It's not just, I'm a scientist, I don't believe anything else. Because even as a scientist, you are making certain metaphysical and epistemological assumptions, which you have to justify in the context of your worldview. If you can't justify and say, well, I don't want to deal with those, Dana. I'm just a scientist. I'm just... Oh, no, it does. Well, I don't know if you're here for the whole talk, but what you believe about reality affects what you think science is. So you're going to have to justify your metaphysical position as well as your scientific one.
That's even also as far as you would do that, you would not be performing science. I mean, it's not that scientists never do that, but as far as they do that, they're not doing science.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, again, what I'm saying is you cannot hold individual beliefs like this. Now, I'm not going to talk about metaphysics. I'm not going to talk about epistemology. All I'm going to talk about is science. And if you think that science is some kind of unified system right now, that's not true. This science is a mess. Logic, the science of logic, is a mess.
Why do you say that?
Because it just becomes so relativistic. There's all different types of logics out there. Again, you get one of my favorites up there. Oh, I don't believe relativism should be true, no. I mean, in a real simple way, if you say, as soon as you say all things are relative, or that everything is relative, I'm going to ask you, is that an absolute statement or a relative one? No, we're talking about truth. We're talking about truth. We're talking about the nature of truth. If you're just talking about the train horns diminishing, it's not the same thing. No, not in the sense, the philosophical sense of relativism. Well, that's... Get my card, we'll have lunch. I'll buy. Because, again, I'm going to talk to you a lot coming here. Well, I'm going to try to show you, banquet, I'm just trying to show you that there's people like Wittgenstein, people like Hume, people like Bonson, Van Til. Well, two of those four, but there's other ones from that are not Christians, will tell you that the reason that you can't even have progress a lot of times in science is because they have totally different philosophical biases. And the way, let me give you an example. Here's a good example. Let's say that this is a skull. I hold up the skull here, and everybody says, well, if you're an evolutionist, you say, oh, look at that. There's proof that evolution is true. And I say, no, I'm a Christian. That's proof that creation is true. The evidence alone is not the only thing that you look at. You have to look at the way that the people interpret the evidence. So you do bring a philosophical bias when you interpret evidence.
As far as you do that, you're not performing science. When you look at that, you put your philosophical bias in the skull. That's not science.
Okay, in science, are you assuming uniformity of nature? That is a philosophical position.
Okay. When you said about uniformity of nature,
Yeah.
for example, right? I still don't really understand what you mean by that question. You said, if I do something a number of times, let's drop an apple 100 times, can I predict that it's going to do the same thing and solve the earth if I drop it to 101st time? And you said in the atheistic view, you couldn't do that.
No, you can't justify it. You can predict it, but I said you can't justify your predictions.
How do you justify it? Why?
Well, if you look at people like David Hume, Bertrand Russell, both of them, yeah. Well, philosophy and science, again, I'm telling you, they're integrated. Because as soon as you say that nature's uniform, you're making a philosophical and taking a metaphysical position. For example, science. If you say that all that exists is the physical universe, and that's what science is, I'm going to say, we've shown that scientifically. But see, the two are tied up into each other. If you say science only relates to what I can see, I say, well, you've already got a bias there, because there might be more that we can test scientifically. So the two are tied up very much to each other. Go ahead. Do you have any other questions?
Yes, okay. Now, you agree that science and the Bible don't contradict, or shouldn't contradict, according to your worldview.
Yeah.
Yet, according to the Bible, the world is only 4,000 years old.
Not
Because it was
necessarily.
created in 7 days, and God created man on the 6th day, right? I think, or the 5th, I forget which one exactly, the 6th day. And if you trace the lineage from Adam and Eve all the way up, like the renowned priest did, you get 4,000 years, about 5,000 by now, 5,000 years old. Science, using carbon dating, shows the world is millions of years older. So either there's a discrepancy in the Bible, or there's a discrepancy with science.
Okay, first of all, we talk about carbon dating. Carbon dating is not accurate beyond, I think, about 15,000 years.
Okay, but uranium
What is
dating,
the
other
I don't know.
dating forms.
I don't know how many years. What is that? Well, they have all kinds of potassium argon or whatever.
Which are
Okay.
considered very accurate.
I'd say two things. Number one is, I tend to agree with the young Earth position, but that's not, to me, a critical issue as far as the Bible goes. There are some people who are Bible-believing Christians who believe the Earth is old, but they do believe that man is young, as far as the 4,000 years. I'm not going to make a huge issue out of it.
Well, I'm just pointing that there's a contradiction between the Bible and the
That's not a
scientific worldview
contradiction,
that we
but you
hold.
can make it fit.
Okay.
And there's other ways you can make, on the young Earth viewpoint, you can make that fit too, which I don't think people here really want to get into right now, but you can.
Another point I'd like to make is that you're saying there's laws of science, but most major scientists agree that there are really no laws of science. You can't, as the laws change as time goes on, as we interpret them more and more. Okay, you're performing a logical fallacy by changing the meaning of the word law as you go along.
Okay, well, let's
Taking
use
the
the
law
word
of
law the way
science.
you want to.
You're
Even
using,
then-
you're using the word law in the man sense, like it's a law, in the absolute sense, it's a law. When science is talking about scientific laws, they're just saying these laws aren't absolute. They can change.
Okay, well, you can take that.
Science is
Let's take
fallible,
that.
not provable.
Okay, but I'm still saying, let's say that your model, for right now, your current model, not law, but your current model is that you believe that nature is uniform. Let's say you still can't justify that, in an atheistic universe. Atheism at its
I'm
base
not
is
claiming
chaotic.
atheism. Let's say I was claiming the Muslim worldview, which is based on the Christian worldview up until Muhammad.
Okay, well, we have
And
to go in.
It's contradictory with Muhammad.
Yeah, what we'd have to do is we have to sit down and do an internal critique of Islam, and I'd have to go through and say, this is where the contradictions occur, and that's why I'd have to reject it as a worldview.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
I was just wondering, you're saying that you believe that I did come on time, but you believe in the Bible because you can see the logic. You believe the Bible is logic?
I do use
correct.
logic. I do use logic, but I don't consider logic my ultimate authority. I do believe I can use logic in the context of the Christian worldview, yeah.
So what do you consider your ultimate authority?
The Bible.
How did you come up with that?
Well, wait a minute, the Bible, so you're saying that the Bible precedes logic?
The Bible is the foundation for it. Because if what the Bible says is true about God, about the universe, about reality, about knowledge, then I can make sense of logic in that, because I believe that the laws of logic are universal, abstract, invariant entities. Those kind of things make sense in a Christian worldview. They don't in, say, a materialistic worldview. If somebody's a materialist who says, well, all it is matter. This is all that exists, is matter. And I'm going to say, well, then how do you have universal, abstract, and invariant entities that are immaterial in your universe, like laws of logic? Now, either you have to abandon their position or you have to modify it in order to incorporate it. So if the guy's saying, well, I'm going to be logical, I say, no, wait. You've already said there is no such thing as an immaterial entity. The laws of logic are not material. So you have to either not use logic, or you're going to have to change your worldview to make sense of it. Christianity, I'm saying, is the only worldview that can make sense of logic. It makes sense of it because it provides a foundation for it, but then it doesn't violate it.
Foundations in Christianity, other than Christianity.
No.
There's no Eastern philosophy.
No.
There's no any other kind of philosophy in biblical
The Bible is a standalone
morality.
worldview. You might find some overlap, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's borrowed from. So, I mean, I would say that you probably most likely will find some overlap.
Development of that body of theology has been very progressive, and as civilization began to, as civilizations transitioned one to the other, there was certain oral transmission of information, of knowledge. You're saying that none of that has transmitted into the Bible.
I mean, transmitted in terms of written down.
The
The oral traditions were documented.
And practice of passing on understanding and knowledge from
Oh, yeah, it was.
social
Sure.
concept.
Yeah, it was an oral tradition passed down until it was codified.
Something had to come from there
Yeah.
to the Christian,
Yeah,
what
within,
Christianity is used as a social concept.
yeah.
And it
That's,
has to be something that's
but that doesn't,
involved in it. Like saying,
but that doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be.
the only keeping the Christian.
I'm not sure if I'm following you. The way the Bible is written.
What you're saying is that the story of the flood is a common story of ancient people in the Middle East. It's not just a story only for the Hebrews. It was in other civilizations as well. And that's true in several other episodes in the Bible. I think that's what you mean. It's some story that is common, but I'm looking, it's cultural history. It's a developmental process from one civilization to the next. And until we have the ability to write it down, it is passed on orally through the families and leaders.
Okay, that's not a problem as far as the Christian worldview goes, though. Yeah, we say we do. There is an oral tradition, but to say, well, that means it incorporates. But you're assuming.
Absolutely. It's the Christian worldview. My theory says that the Christian worldview is a collection of other worldviews that were passed on from
Okay, well, that-
civilizations that existed before them.
Okay, but I would say you can argue that. You'd have to prove it, or you have to get at least some kind of evidence for it. And to say, well, I find that there's some similarities between all of them, so therefore it proves it. That's not necessarily a proof. You're saying, well, we find similarities. I would expect to find similarities in other beliefs.
Use other disciplines to do that, anthropology and those things.
Okay, well, even I think anthropologically, you'll see that.
By saying that those scientific methods aren't appropriate, they don't prove it. This is what I heard you say.
The scientific method doesn't prove anything.
So, you're basically saying no, you can't prove it because the methods aren't available to us.
Oh, no, I mean, they do have methods. I'm saying, I think they're very imprecise. They're very imprecise. Okay.
That's true.
Okay, just saying, Ralph had his, let's go ahead, we can go back in a second. Let's go, Ralph. Okay.
I go to the Assembly of God, the Pentecostal, the Presbyterian, and I find out, as for instance, in a different matter, that grace is saved, and Christians don't really believe in life reincarnation. I go someplace and Christians are dancing with snakes because their interpretation is the way they pray to God, the way they think it's snakes. Now, this is your, and I can go on and on.
And I can do the same thing with atheists.
Right, and you can do more, well, as I told you originally, I'm not an atheist. And that's
I
why
can
I
do
have
the
no
same thing
problem.
with theists, by the way.
Okay, see, well, I think you've heard me speak here before, so I like that word. Well, not deist, but deist.
Deists, okay. I could talk about deists that way, too.
Okay, so based on that then, would I be safe in this room or elsewhere to ask with the real Christian or Christian singular, please stand up? In other words, based on your absolute thing, I really believe that you have now checkmated yourself. Are you saying then that if it's absolute, then how does man communicate to God? That's not a personal question.
No, I'm not.
Rhetorical. You don't have to
How do you say I'm
how do you
checkmating
pray to
myself?
God? Is your way the right way? Are the guys dancing with snakes the wrong way?
Okay,
Are the
well,
hypnotists
okay,
and the
well,
metaphysical
let's talk about that second. Are they wrong? The question is,
No, that's too simplistic. Because that's
okay, what is my checkmate? I'm missing the checkmate. You're saying that there's various people who say I'm Christian to contradict each other. Okay. But you gotta remember, but it does, okay. Okay, well, here's what it is, Ralph. Here's the way I'd answer that. Let me answer. Okay. There are a lot of different people who call themselves Christians and they contradict each other. There are a lot of people who call themselves deists or atheists, or you pick one. Even Muslims. You can find contradiction with any worldview. That's nothing new. The far as the Christian worldview goes, we believe that this is the ultimate standard. My argument is not so much me against Fred Burkle over here, who says I'm a Christian and handle snakes. And you say, well, look, these two guys are arguing and contradicting each other. If we both hold this out as our ultimate authority, then this is the thing that determines it. Not me. I don't determine truth. And even tonight, the debate here is not you against me, it's that.
The Crusades have killed thousands of people.
Okay, let's talk about the Crusades. No, actually, I'd say no, because you can take the Bible and you can show how that's wrong. But that, I think that's interesting. A lot of people say, well, all these Christians have been killing through the centuries. And I think that's amazing, because I think the statistic I read on the Crusades is there was over 30 years, and there were about 100 people a year killed. Now, first of all, I think that was wrong. Okay? I think the Bible would say that it's wrong. But now you want to compare it to somebody like Stalin, an atheist, and take his tens of millions, and you want to keep score? But you see, I'm just saying, it's interesting how we want to say, well, these Christians are doing this, when in fact atheists are doing it, and you can pick any other worldview you want.
What is the right way to a Christian?
This one. You have to get in and you have to study it. You get in and you have to study it, and it's between you and the Lord. No, God is absolute. The fact that I have a different understanding of portions of it doesn't mean that God has changed. It means I've got a problem that I've got to resolve.
But you said it's not relative to the next question on the question. What is the way? And I will convert to Christianity.
All right.
You tell me what is the proper way, and I'll buy lunch.
That's right.
What is the right way to pray to God?
To pray? Well, you have a model, and you could use Matthew 5, you could use John 17, these prayers. There's several models.
And I use Revelation 19:11.
Which says what?
It says that the Lord of hosts is riding around on a white horse with a coming out of his mouth.
There's a sword.
Blood wiping out everybody. And I pray for that.
Yeah, you can. You can. That's the answer to your question is yes. Okay. Behind you, and then. Okay.
God, the three persons, Him being the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yes.
So therefore, would you not believe in anything before the day that Jesus was born, seeing that before God was full? And
Jesus was God come in the flesh. Jesus existed before, Jesus, the third part and the second person of the Trinity was always existing. You're saying he incarnated as a man, so no, I believe the Trinity's always existed, always will exist.
Yeah, I respect your views on the young Earth age of the universe, etc., and carbon dating, but they're actually a pretty small minority of Christians actually engaged in science, Christians who have PhDs in various natural sciences, and I just want to say that the vast majority of those Christians who actually are practicing scientists, researchers, and have their PhDs are people who hold to an old Earth view of the cosmos and cosmogony, and most of them actually have confidence in carbon dating also. But his view is a significant minority in Christians and science. So it doesn't represent the whole group of Christians and science, is all I want to say.
But there are differences, but he's saying it can't be relativistic. It's the way you have to be.
Well, he would acknowledge it. Let him speak.
There's an absolute truth, but it doesn't mean that we all comprehend it. It hasn't been determined what the truth is. We don't understand that. That's why we do science.
But his Bible, he's saying his Bible is the absolute truth. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
You believe that the only truth, in other words, you have to start from a truth, to illogically, which that includes the Bible.
Okay, let me ask you this though. In fact, let me ask you, do you believe that two things can contradict each other and both be true?
Both might be wrong also. There's no problem with it.
You would have to prove that.
Prove it to you? No, I'm asking you. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just,
lines up with reality and makes the best sense out of logic, morality, epistemology, ontology. So I think what's happening, we're getting the whole group is getting a little sidetracked into various forms of Christianity. There are certain things that are essential, I think, that would designate a Christian, such as most Christians agree on Apostles' Creed, something like that, the bare minimum or their necessities. But taking that into account, I think what he's trying to say, what I gather what you're saying is, it is the most rational faith.
Okay,
Is that right?
I wouldn't, not in the sense, I wouldn't say it's the most rational. I'd say it's the only rational one. Only. Right. And also, this the idea of faith. I think Kevin last week was saying the way he was defining faith had something to do with faith is when you can't prove something, you make an irrational belief in something. Well, I don't believe in that definition at all. I think everybody has certain faith commitments, whether you're an atheist or an agnostic, whatever it is, you have certain faith commitments. The question is, in what are you going to place your faith?
Okay, that's one consideration. I want you to explain the situation with you. There are two people born, two same born. One to a billionaire with wealth, everything, and one to a poor guy on the road living on track. And both are so created by God. Why God would create that soul, a small comfort, and God would not create this soul without any comfort and access to language. Give me a rational explanation. Don't jump to the same thing that God thinks this thing.
You're asking about why can there be a God that allows evil?
I don't want an answer. That's a very abstract. I want an answer to this question. I don't want an abstract answer. Yeah, we're dealing with abstract.
Okay. Well, these are very difficult issues. You can't just give simple answers.
You said the Bible is the most rational thing. I don't give an explanation immediately.
But what happens, though, is you say, this is the answer I want. Here's my criteria. I want it to be absolutely simple. I say, well, it's not a simple answer. You say, see, you can't answer my question. I reject it. But see, that's not good philosophy. Well, let's just deal with that. Why did God create one rich and one poor?
How come that soul, both souls according to Christianity are created at the instant since they don't have any previous birth or anything? They are created at the why would one person be poor? Or, for example, if there is a child today 18-year-old died of leukemia, and there is one person who lives up to 28 years, why would that soul go through all the things? And why would another soul leave us all the pleasures and everything?
Let me give you two answers to that. Okay, number one is I'm going to say I don't know. Okay, now, let me finish that. I don't know because there are certain things that God doesn't reveal to me. But see, that's not a problem for the Christian. If you say God has to explain it to me, I say, well, on what basis do you think God has to answer to you? See, the problem here is God is not the one on trial. You are, and I am.
I've got the same thing.
Okay?
Unfortunately, the thing that God explains to you why it happened, maybe a little more.
Well, you and I can talk about Hinduism and getting into karma and things, but I think karma is one of the filthiest tricks that have ever been played in this way.
Yeah, but you don't have an answer. Yeah, what's the answer? It's better than a non-answer.
A what answer?
Yeah, what's the answer? Even according to you.
The worst answer? No, a bad answer is not better than no answer.
You're still better than the non-answer.
Yeah, no
better than a non-answer.
Okay, we got that on tape. Okay, one second. Dave hasn't said anything yet. Dave, you go.
I gotta go.
Hey, thanks for coming. You got my card? Yeah. Bye. Bye-bye.
Don't worry, by the end of this, you'll be holding a banquet.
He was the original. He can buy.
I'll be there.
I'll be there.
He's the poor man.
No, but God will send him help. Don't worry.
We're not worried.
Okay, Dave's got it. Okay. Okay, you got me.
I wanted to say something about your question about how why God make one person rich and one person poor and one person died like that horrible death and other people live. That's like that's their thing. That's what they will put into you.
Oh, wait a minute. No, because there's no karma in the Bible. That's the truth. There's no reincarnation. There's no life of the soul before it's incarnated.
Let me just make a little comment about that.
But
We're assuming that
who died was there for a purpose. There had some people around them, and there to prove a point. And once they're gone, to stay through teachings and their learnings, and
the problem is if we're assuming that somehow wealth is a better situation to be in than non-wealth. Christianity doesn't believe that at all. Matter of fact, wealth is often a curse. Well, I'm talking about in response to his answer that he make an assumption that, why is this inequity here? Well, I don't necessarily see that as an inequity. It might be more fair for the guy that has less money, because he's not blinded by riches. Riches can blind people.
Suppose that this young woman's person who lived with the short time, she was put there on earth for a purpose, to have an impact on someone else during her life on the life.
How can I presuppose that?
That's what she presupposes.
Well, I'd say
That's
that,
what her argument presupposes. You cannot presuppose that if you believe that there is no life of the soul before you don't believe in any reincarnation.
well, no, you can believe that the people have a purpose here on earth, if you don't believe in reincarnation.
But how can you do that? How can
Because
you
God, if there is a God,
what that woman, how does she know?
but you may not know what that purpose is, but you can look at what the Bible says about man and about God. We see that God creates men for specific purposes. That's not a problem for Christians. It doesn't require a prior life in order to believe that.
In my eyes, it's a thing that
The presupposition is the biblical.
that there's somebody else deciding what her role was on the earth.
Yeah, in a certain sense, I mean, you get into the Bible, you see that God is active in that role, yeah.
There is some sort of life of the soul.
Not prior to.
In some other,
Not prior to their
in
existence,
some
no.
other realm.
Not prior to their existence.
That God begins to have an impact on an individual at birth.
Yeah. That doesn't mean he doesn't foresee them. Okay, there's a question in the back. You got a question? Is the truth the original one? The original one. This one is an NIV. Yeah, I do. So King James, yeah, I mean, you can compare them. It's very much the same. I mean, it just comes down to the question of wording and the Hebrew Bible. Well, we don't have all of the Hebrew Bible, but we have quite a bit of it. Not the original. Yeah, no problem. Dead Sea Scrolls also, not a problem. That issue gets down in interpretation and which Bible can you trust and things like that. But then you start getting into some sciences of hermeneutics, which is studying interpretation and things like that. The Hebrew Bible didn't believe in evil? No. I would not say a Jew believes that, no. No, I don't think that Jews believe that. Oh, yeah. No, I don't think Jews believe that. Or maybe talking about some kind of branch of Judaism that I don't know about, but as a worldview, no, they would believe there's a right and wrong. Yeah.
Okay, my question is, but you said a little while ago that Christians, regardless of denomination and so on, is an individual who believes in the Bible, who accepts the precepts of the Bible.
Well, I gave the interpretation or the definition at the beginning of the paper. It's not just saying, well, I believe in the Bible, because as the Bible says, the demons say they believe and they shudder. It's not just a question of saying, well, I believe it. I mean,
A little while ago, when around, they would say, well, there are all these different Christians doing different things, calling themselves Christians. And the question to you was, are they right or not? And you said, well, as long as they believe in the Bible, they're right.
no, that's not what I said. No, the Bible is going to be the ultimate determiner of right and wrong, not me. I can't say, you're wrong. I know that you're wrong.
But you are saying you're wrong. I mean, right
No.
now you say Hinduism, existentialism, nihilism, Mormonism. Now,
Okay,
I've had Mormon friends. They believe in the Bible.
Okay.
I'm sure they accept some of the same things. I
They don't
don't know
believe
their
in the
theology.
Trinity. They don't believe in the Trinity.
But that's a human
Yeah.
judgment. That's a human judgment.
No, that's what the Bible
thing
says.
I object to.
That's what the Bible says.
You said Jesus is God. If Jesus is God, can you explain to me why, whenever he was baptized, the cloud come overhead, and when Jesus was on earth, he said, they that worship God must be worshiped in the Spirit. I don't believe anybody in this room has ever seen the Spirit. Now, whenever he was baptized, the cloud came over and said, this is my beloved Son. It didn't say, this is God here on earth. And whenever he ascended Moses and Elijah, the cloud came over and said, this is my beloved Son, believe in him. It didn't say, this is God on
Where
earth.
is that about Elisha?
Transfiguration.
Transfiguration. He
Yeah, you're talking about Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, you said he's God, but
Yeah, you have to look at what the word son means there. If you're thinking of it in terms of human sense, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about in terms of a different type of
well,
relation.
Jesus was a human son from the standpoint of view that he was.
Yeah, but
But I don't believe he was God.
it depends if you're talking about the human body of Jesus or the fact that he was also God. In Christian, the Bible says that he was both God and man. Oh yeah. Again, you just go to the Apostles' Creed, you go to Westminster Confession and say, no, it's a summation. It's a summation. You see, the thing is, now what we're getting down to, this issue about interpretation. So it's very interesting if people say, well, you can start throwing up your hands and say, well, so many ways to interpret the Bible, there's just no way you can know. Well, if that's your view.
I have no argument with the Bible, sir.
Okay.
I just asked you that question because there was a crowd came over and doesn't say this is God down here. It says this is
Yeah, but
my
Jesus
beloved
said
Son.
that I and the Father are one, and there's plenty of other verses I could show you where Jesus claimed to be God.
I am the Father one. He said before Moses was.
I am.
He said before Abraham was, I am.
Jesus said that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Which is what God
That
said.
doesn't mean the personal Jesus is there.
Not the human one. No, the God one.
It's the same thing as when the Hebrew people were in the fire. The king got up and rose and said the Son of God is there. There's 4 people in the fire, not 3 anymore, there's 4. And I see the Son of God.
Yeah. I don't see a problem there. Am I missing something? I think the key is, let me summarize that point. When we talk about interpretation, you can take the view and say, well, there's so many ways to interpret this that we'll just throw it out. And that's dangerous because if you're going to do that, no, okay. I'm not saying you're saying that.
I don't want to throw it out, nor am I interpreting it different ways. A guy brought up a while ago about, according to Bible scholars, the women weren't believed in that day. It's the only reason the other 3 apostles wrote was some man from that day.
So I remember him saying that, yeah. I need to research that.
Before the Bible scholars, the other 3 disciples wrote, a man saw Jesus first. A woman actually saw him first.
Yeah, again, I'd have to look at the passages, but I don't remember.
The scholars,
Yeah, the question is, did it say first? And I'm going to assume that the answer is yes, it don't say first.
Others didn't see him till after the tomb.
Right, but I don't think
I don't say the Bible says first. I don't say the Bible says
And if it doesn't say first, then there's no argument. Okay, Ralph? Yeah, consider, well, I'm going to show my bias here and say, consider the source of those theologians. The way they interpret the phenomenon. Huh?
I think you know study it a little more objectively than.
Well, hey, if you think that people are objective, then you're way off. Nobody is
I said
objective.
a little more objective.
Well, you have to justify what
But you don't
standard of
relativity at all, so
objectivity
either
is.
you're objective or you're not. Anyway,
Well, no,
what
that's
do you
not
think-
true.
my question is, what do you think the danger is in just throwing the Bible out? I want to hear what the conclusion of your statement was.
Okay, let me, okay. Ralph, I'll get you next, okay? What is the danger of throwing the Bible out? Meaning of not believing it? I think you lose the ability to make any kind of sense of, it's the inability to make sense of anything in your experience and justify it. It's going to become a purely, no, see, you're assuming that. It's real easy to assume that. It's very easy for me to say everything you say is fictional and it's irrational. But just to throw out like that, I mean, what makes fiction? The Bible believes it's true. Okay, what is your criterion? How do you know what's true?
Observable and repeatable.
Okay, have you ever observed the assumption? Oh, wait.
But I mean, in
Okay, let's keep going. What's it going to take?
various sense data.
Which sense data are considered legitimate and why?
Any sense data you can use.
Is there 5 senses?
Yeah.
Okay, now have you ever used those 5 senses to look at your assumption that you have to use your senses to prove something true?
Have you ever used those 5 senses to look at your assumption?
Right. Have you ever sensed your assumption that you have to use your senses to prove something true? You haven't.
What
You
else do
can't.
you use?
You
What else do
can't
you
use.
use?
Oh, gosh, there's a lot to it. Look at the history of philosophy. There's pragmatism, there's rationalism, there's empiricism, there's transcendentalism, there's intuitivism. I can go through 3 dozen different types of epistemology. The question is, which one is justifiable? Huh? Oh, no, some of them are. Some of them say that's all you can use. Some of them say, like, for example, let's take the 2 classical ones. One classical one is empiricism. Empiricist says the way you know something's true is you go outside and look. A rationalist says no, you don't. You sit down and you think about it, and if it's coherent, that's what's true.
How do you know whether it's coherent or not?
Well, they would say if it's rationally coherent or consistent.
What are they basing that on?
Well, you'd have to go. I'm not arguing a rationalist viewpoint. I'm saying there are these two different viewpoints.
So what's the other valid viewpoint other than the consensus support?
Well,
In your opinion?
I think that you have to. Well, for example, I think that there's revelation. That's how I know. Okay.
Where's that
And the thing is, even if you say it comes from God. Yeah, I think there is, because if you don't believe this, you can't make sense of reason at all. I'm already asking now, how do you know? For example, you say you believe in laws of logic. Have you ever sensed the laws of logic? You can't. It's an immaterial, abstract entity. Now, how do you make sense of an immaterial, abstract
I don't know if
entity?
that's true or not. I don't know if it's true that it's immaterial.
Logic?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't
What
know
is
for
it?
a fact. And if I don't know what it is, I don't have a problem with saying I don't know if it's
Okay.
not.
Well,
There's
that's
no way
the
I can
point.
know at this point, so I don't care.
Well, what you're saying then is,
There's a lot of things we don't know.
No, but what you're saying is this-
But no, the religious view is
Everybody's got a
things
religion.
you don't know.
you've got your own religion.
No, I don't.
You're
I'm an
believing
atheist.
things
The
that
definition of an atheist is
you've
don't
got a
believe in
faith
any religion.
commitment. You've got a faith commitment to empiricism that you can't justify.
No, I don't. I have no faith commitment to anything.
Sure, you said you have a commitment to say, I have to use my 5 senses to know if something's true. That's an assumption. It's a faith commitment because you can't prove it.
Well, there's
You're
no way.
accepting it on faith.
That is not. I can throw it out as easy as I can throw anything else out. I don't
Okay,
care.
well, if you want to throw it out, go ahead. I would agree with you.
And that would be as valid as anything else.
No, I
To
would
throw it
agree.
out, okay? So that's what a definition of an atheist is, that you have no religion. If you have a religion, you're not an atheist by definition.
No, that's not the definition of an atheist is.
What is the word theist? Where'd that come from? What's theism?
Theism is God.
Well, not just God. It's theology.
Belief in God.
It's God.
Belief in God.
So
Atheism is, well, depending on how, if you want your
theology
current,
can't study Zen Buddhism. There's no God in Zen Buddhism.
wait a minute, let's just do one thing at a time. You said, what is theism? Theism is the study of the belief in the existence of God.
I would say
Atheism,
religion. I wouldn't say God.
well, see, I reject that idea of religion because that makes it sound like, okay, you have religious people over here, and then you have your objective, neutral, scientific people who are empiricists and everything.
No, I wouldn't
That
say
is
that, no.
absolutely as much of a faith commitment
I would
as
say
any of the other ones
people
are.
over here and the other non-religious people over here.
What qualifies as religious? Somebody believes in immaterial entities? Somebody believes in spiritual entities?
I would say basically things were supernatural.
Even if you just saying it's philosophy, not a good religion.
I don't like the word religion because I think it's
So you
really
think the word
overworked.
religion shouldn't even exist?
No, you can use. I'm not saying that you can't use it. I'm saying in terms of making things understandable. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody
What
has
does the word
certain-
religion mean?
What?
Define the word religion.
Why do I need
Simple
to?
question.
It registers down the read it.
Way of life.
Religion to me is not an issue. I mean, you can define it with the web. I'm just saying in terms
You
of
keep
communicating.
Wait. You keep. When I ask you a question, you keep going to a different subject.
Okay, ask me a
keep
question.
asking
more
different
question.
Because I'm trying
you're
to
jumping
change
around
the
things.
subject you keep going to.
Go for one.
Okay.
Let's deal with one.
I was talking. You said you don't believe in the word religion, or you don't like using the word religion.
I don't like to use it. Right.
So I asked you if you think we should just throw the word religion
No.
out. You said no. Why is that?
Let me say, let's be practical. For me to be able to comprehend, discuss with you, it's easier for me, and hopefully be easier for you to use the concept of worldview, which even atheistic scholars and philosophers are using. Because they're saying, the reason I don't like the word religion is it conveys this idea of these religious zealots who just use this empty faith commitment to believe in this God. Wait, let me finish my thought. And the reason that's why I don't like to use it, because it gives the impression that the people who aren't these religious zealots are somehow objective, neutral, and just these people that totally have a handle on science and logic, as if somehow science and logic are these staid, true, unchanging sciences, when in fact they're not. They're in complete disarray.
Yeah, but the fact that these live your life basically in science and logic. I mean, you don't just walk out in the street in front of a car that's going 40 miles an hour.
And that makes sense in a Christian worldview. In an atheistic worldview, it doesn't.
But to define what logic is,
Okay,
that's
I define.
logic also.
We talked about what logic is. I think logic is.
So whether or not it makes sense in a Christian worldview doesn't change the fact that it's based on logic.
What?
That you wouldn't walk out in front of a car that's going 60 miles an hour at 10 feet away from you.
Yeah, that's,
I mean, it doesn't matter if it fits into a Christian worldview or not. That's something you
well,
can
it does
do. That's
matter to
logical.
me if it does. Sure.
So if it fits into a Christian worldview, are you saying it's not logical?
No, I'm saying if it does fit into it, it is logical.
Okay, so I'm saying you do live your life by science and logic.
No, I live my life by the Bible, which gives me a foundation for even believing that logic exists.
So in the
So I mean, I don't
so in the
throw out
Bible,
logic.
let's break it that way. In the Bible standpoint, why? What does it say in the Bible that makes you not walk out in front of a car going 60 miles an hour at 10 feet away from you?
Well, there's various things. I'd say life is precious. I shouldn't throw it away like that because I have some significance here.
It doesn't say you can throw it away like that.
Yeah, you can't be. Well, I mean, you want me to give you a specific verse and sit down and do that over lunch. But you can see
No,
it.
because I don't think there is
That's
one.
not.
Well,
That's like saying, Dan, quote Isaiah 37:4. Right now, you don't believe in the Bible. That's ridiculous. You know I can sit down and show you about life being valuable out of the Bible. Nobody. I mean, that's just.
So does it say specifically not to walk out in front of a car?
No, cars weren't mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
Yeah, we're getting ridiculous. Ralph.
Very fast. I wish to comment on that. I understand the Bible condemns homosexuality. Does that mean, please let me make three points. Does that mean then when I see ads in the newspaper saying the Christian church for gays, etc., that all those gays are going to hell because they're not really Christians? The next question is Catholics, and I've brought this up before, to the best of my understanding, are Christians. And since Catholics believe that the Virgin Mary only gave birth to Christ, and Christians are aware and fully aware that Mary had somewhere between 8 and 9 children. Therefore, if it's absolute, not relativistic, does that mean the Catholics are going to hell? Can you also comment on whether there is a destiny or not? And you mentioned free will in here. And my last remark was, although I don't know Ram well, and this is not meant to be a personal remark, I think that you should, in my opinion, refer to something you disagree with as not being valid. To refer to commerce being dirty, I think tends to almost be insulting if not dictatorial. And for you to also state your opinion that people who don't believe in your point of view to be unstable and irrational. No, use another word. Irrational. The definition of irrational is not neurotic, psychoneurotic, or anything else. It's psychotic. I believe that anyone...
That's your definition, that's not mine.
Well, suppose when I meet you for lunch since I'm buying, suppose we use your dictionary for mine.
We'll use my dictionary. We'll see if irrational is psychotic.
That's correct.
Okay, we'll do that.
And I'll also bring the literature to show you about ontology. I'm becoming concerned, and here's my final remark. There are some people who refer to themselves as the chosen people. There are some people who refer to themselves as the master race. And Dan has referred to himself as the real and only religion.
No, not me.
As a believer in the real and only religion. And I think that the master race, the chosen people, and the only and real religion who can't even make up their mind whether the Virgin Mary had 8 kids or 1 kid, I think you've got very serious problems. And I think to tell this man that he has a dirty religion or a dirty to have karma, I don't have to agree with karma, I think is really uncalled for. And you're giving away a very, in my opinion, part of your personality that tends to be very static and not dynamic, and very dictatorial. And I will enjoy having that.
Okay. Number one, I agree with you in the comment about my comment about karma. That was too rough. And it's not fair. I need to sit down and talk with him. Not logical. I would argue it's logical. I would not argue that it's fair. But you can have emotionally something that's also logical. The two are necessarily mutually exclusive. As far as homosexuality, I'm going to say I think the Bible does teach that homosexuality is wrong, but it also teaches that gossip is wrong. It teaches a lot of things are wrong. So we say a homosexual is not going to go to heaven. The Bible says that anybody that does not believe in Jesus Christ as their personal Savior will not go to heaven. That doesn't mean if he's homosexual, if he's a gossip, if he's a liar, it doesn't matter. Whatever they are, if they don't believe in Jesus Christ as their Savior, they won't go to heaven. Well, murder. And murdering homosexuals? Oh. Well, we could... Well, see, this is what's interesting. Now, you're saying, if you're going to say that Mormonism is Christianity, then what you're going to say is that two things can contradict each other and both be true. Mormonism denies some of the most fundamental concepts and precepts of the Bible.
Well, I'm not a Mormon and I don't know the theology.
Well, I'll tell you, I've done some study of Mormonism, and it's not even close.
This is really good independent for anybody to put it down. I just don't like
Well, I mean, I know it sounds hard.
Jesus himself, he dealt with people of all religions, all races, all classes, all cultures. He healed them.
You never put one down.
He did
Oh,
not
I
put
would
them
disagree.
down.
Read about the Pharisees in Matthew 25, I think. You want to talk about putting them down? We call them snakes. He did put them down. He told them they were going to hell. He said, you make people twice as fit for hell as you are yourselves. That was very strong. Look at Paul. Paul went and debated in the synagogue. Now, that doesn't mean that if I have not been gracious tonight, I apologize. But that does not mean that
But
you
you're
can
not the
throw up
only
a
one.
argument.
Any speaker who gets up there, it seems to me. I mean, last week, there was Kevin who was saying, if you don't believe what the five senses tell you is the only reality, you're irrational.
Well, you
He
got
used that same word, irrational.
right.
Why are you saying that it's wrong to say that? So then you're judging them.
No, but
I'm saying
he's never felt childbirth. So
Okay,
the childbirth is not real. It's not real, Kevin.
And
So, is that right, Buddy? Childbirth is not real because he's never felt it.
I'm not trying to defend Kevin. I'm just saying your criticism is other people shouldn't judge other people. But you're judging people who judge.
there you go. And even if it's
So are you guilty of your own criticism?
okay, this little figure can draw. First of all, they have no space.
Is that a judgment?
That's not a judgment, that's a fact. And secondly, when he was explaining figure 1 through 4, he said, well, they all have a common set of beliefs, so they're all smiling, they all agree. And then he said, and therefore, one can judge the other, can say, you are wrong because. Why not say, I am wrong because?
Well,
Each
if
of
I
them
do
has
not
the same.
adhere to the standard, I can't say I'm wrong. And I've been wrong many times.
Well, I'm
But
not
the thing is,
really
is
talking
there-
about you. I'm saying
Is there a
that
standard that we can look to?
the standard is not in order to judge one another.
In some
standard
senses it is.
in order for us to adhere
The
to that standard.
differentiation there, though, is that are we judging the heart or are we judging the action? And there is a differentiation there. I can't
don't
judge
think
somebody's
that
heart. If I
God
see
may be
somebody
a
put,
judge over anybody, and I agree with what you're saying. Maybe I am being judgmental right now, but I'm kidding in that sense. But I try hard not
Well, the
to
problem
do
is,
that. And it
it can be
annoys
just as
me, I
bad.
have to say, when I hear it from a public figure in a public position there, on the stage,
it can be just as bad to be silent, though. Because if the truth is not spoken, so I don't want to sound mean to these people. I don't want to try to be dogmatic. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm saying these people need to hear what the truth is. And the truth hurts sometimes.
do you think that they only hear it from human beings? Do you think that God doesn't
I think they hear it. If it doesn't accord with that. Because now you're...
that there are times when we need to say something. What I call the master's code, where it says, if you see somebody sinning, go to him individually.
Yeah,
Speak to him. Okay, I
that's
understand that.
exactly right.
But I also believe that God speaks to each of us. And he tells us. I may say, had plenty of reviews from my father, mother, God, that have helped me sometimes a lot more than when a human being has said it to me.
How do you know they're coming from God?
Because they're good.
How do you know
How do you know
it's
it's good?
Because they love me, or they
Because you feel they're blessed? Or because you feel that? How do you know you're feeling it? What standard do you use for feeling? Because it felt good? Felt right?
So you go right back to
Then
the
that's
Bible.
personal, not universal. Yeah, but I
You have to have
go back to the Bible, but
You have to have some kind of
when
standard
Jesus
of
Christ was on earth,
judgment.
he's saying he was God. He said, don't judge.
No, he said, there's two different
Judge not, at least you be judged.
Yeah, but he also said if your brother has a splinter in his eye, you've got a log in your own eye, before you go after the splinter, take your own out. Right. But he's saying you still see that splinter in his eye and you still want to correct him. And you want to correct him lovingly, like Matthew 18, Galatians 6. Those talk about the procedures you go through. You do this first some self-examination. But that doesn't preclude you from going to your brother and in love saying, hey, brother, you're off here.
I'm just saying that is usually my second step after examining my own life.
I think we're going to call it a night. Appreciate y'all being here. Hopefully I wasn't too tough on you. You are. Appreciate you being here. If anybody wants to talk some more, feel free to come get my card. We'll do lunch. Thank you.
By the way, did Mary have only one child or